If you are married right now, if you are lying in bed next to someone, or sitting across the table from them, or sharing a roof and a life with them, Padre Pio revealed something about what may be happening to both of your souls at this very moment. And it is not what you think. It is not adultery. It is not abuse. It is not the big sins that break marriages apart in public. It is something far more common, far more invisible, and far more destructive. It is a sin that Padre Pio said he encountered in nearly every married couple who knelt in his confessional, a sin that neither husband nor wife ever confessed, because neither one recognized it as a sin. And yet this sin, according to what Padre Pio saw with the spiritual eyes God had given him, was slowly destroying both of their souls simultaneously. Not one, both, linked together in a chain of mutual spiritual devastation that neither could see and neither could escape on their own. Let me tell you something most people don't realize. In all my years of attending prayer groups and parish events in Coventry, I have watched dozens of married couples who looked perfectly fine on the outside slowly grow cold toward each other. They came to Mass together. They sat in the same pew. They received communion side by side. But anyone who looked closely could see it. The distance between their bodies in the pew. The absence of a glance during the sign of peace. The way they walked to the car park afterward. Two people sharing the same path but inhabiting different worlds. I recognized it because I lived it. For almost 2 years, David and I existed in that exact state. And what I am about to tell you is the story that showed me what was really happening, not just in my marriage, but in my soul. What you are going to learn today will change how you understand your marriage forever. You will discover the specific sin that Padre Pio identified as the hidden destroyer of Catholic marriages. You will hear what happened when a husband and wife came to his confessional separately, each convinced the other was to blame, and what Padre Pio saw connecting their souls that made both of them weep. You will understand the spiritual mechanism by which this sin operates, how it feeds on both spouses equally, growing stronger as each one retreats further into silence. And you will learn what Padre Pio prescribed as the cure, a practice so simple that most couples reject it as impossible. But first, I need you to understand something about the sacrament of marriage that most Catholics have never been taught, not in their pre-marriage preparation, not in their catechism classes, not in a single homily. And it is this: when you marry in the Catholic Church, something happens in the spiritual world that cannot be undone. A bond is formed, not a metaphorical bond, not a symbolic bond. A real, spiritual, invisible bond that links your soul to the soul of your spouse for as long as you both live. And through that bond, everything that happens in one soul affects the other. Everything. Your prayers affect their soul. Your sins affect their soul. Your spiritual growth lifts them. Your spiritual decline drags them down. You are, in the most literal spiritual sense, chained together. And that chain was designed by God to be a chain of love. But it can become something else entirely. The story I need to tell you took place in 1953 in the confessional of San Giovanni Rotondo, and it involves a couple named Roberto and Filomena Capozzi from the town of Manfredonia, about 25 kilometers from Padre Pio's monastery. Roberto Capozzi was a fisherman. He came from a long line of fishermen who had worked the Adriatic coast for generations. He was a quiet man, broad-shouldered, deeply tanned from years on the water, and profoundly uncomfortable with words. He spoke in short sentences. He expressed emotion through action rather than language. He loved his wife, but he had never once told her so in words. He showed it, he believed, by working 14-hour days on the boat, by bringing home fish for the table, by keeping the house in good repair, by never raising his hand against her, by being faithful. These were, in his mind, the proofs of love. Words were unnecessary. Filomena Capozzi was the opposite in almost every way. She was the daughter of a school teacher, raised on books and conversation and the open expression of feeling. She was warm, articulate, deeply emotional, and profoundly lonely. She had married Roberto at 20 because she loved his strength and his steadiness, but after 15 years of marriage and 4 children, she had come to feel that she was living with a wall, a kind, reliable, faithful wall, but a wall nonetheless. Roberto came home, ate dinner, played briefly with the children, and went to bed. He did not ask about her day. He did not share his thoughts. He did not pray with her, though he went to Mass on Sundays. He existed beside her in a parallel silence that she experienced as a slow, suffocating rejection. Neither Roberto nor Filomena was doing anything that the world would call sinful. He was faithful. She was devoted. He worked hard. She kept the home. He went to Mass. She prayed the rosary. On the surface, they were a model Catholic family. But something was terribly wrong, and it had been growing worse for years. The first sign was the prayers. Filomena had always prayed the rosary aloud in the evening, with the children gathered around her in the kitchen. Roberto would sit in his chair by the window, cleaning his nets, and listen. He never joined in, but he was present, and his presence was enough. But in 1948, 5 years into the silence, Filomena moved the rosary to the bedroom. She closed the door. She prayed alone. She told the children it was because they were getting older and needed to learn to pray on their own. But the real reason was that she could no longer pray in the same room as Roberto without feeling a rage that made the holy words taste like ash in her mouth. The second sign was the children. Teresa, the eldest, began to have terrible headaches every Sunday morning before Mass. The doctor found nothing wrong, but the headaches were real, and they came like clockwork, precisely at the hour when the family should have been preparing to worship together. It was as if the spiritual tension between Roberto and Filomena had become a physical weight pressing down on their daughter's young skull. The other children, Carlo, Lucia, and baby Piero, showed their own symptoms. Carlo became aggressive at school. Lucia withdrew into books and refused to play with other children. Piero cried inconsolably at night, as if sensing a darkness in the home that his infant mind could not name, but his infant soul could feel. The third sign was the dreams. Filomena began dreaming of a house with no doors, every room connected to every other room, but there was no way out and no way in. She wandered the halls in her dream, calling Roberto's name, but her voice produced no sound. She woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, with the sensation of a hand pressed against her chest, and she knew, with the certainty that only a soul in distress can know, that something was spiritually wrong in her home. Something beyond the normal difficulties of marriage, something that required not a conversation, but an intervention. Hold on to what I just described, because the way Padre Pio diagnosed what was happening between Roberto and Filomena will change how you think about every silent moment in your own marriage. The pilgrimage to San Giovanni Rotondo was Filomena's idea. She had heard from her cousin, a woman named Angela who lived in Foggia, that Padre Pio could see things about people that they could not see about themselves. Angela had gone to his confessional 3 years earlier for what she thought was a routine confession and had come away transformed. She told Filomena, "He will see you, all of you, the parts you hide from yourself." Filomena convinced Roberto to go, though he resisted. He did not see the point. His conscience was clean. He had not committed any serious sin. What would a friar in a confessional tell him that he did not already know? They arrived at San Giovanni Rotondo on a cold morning in February of 1953. The church was packed. They waited for hours. Filomena went to confession first. She knelt in the confessional and began with her usual list. Impatience with the children, a moment of gossip with a neighbor, missing her morning prayers twice, small sins, the sins of a busy mother. Padre Pio let her finish. And then he said something that stopped her heart. "You have left out the one that matters most." Filomena froze. She searched her memory. What had she forgotten? She could think of nothing. Padre Pio continued, and his voice was not harsh. It was gentle, almost tender, like a physician who knows the diagnosis will cause pain, but delivers it with care. "My daughter, you have been punishing your husband with silence for 7 years. Not the silence of peace, the silence of war, the silence that says, 'You have failed me, and I will make you feel it by withdrawing the one thing you know I can give, your warmth, your words, your presence. You are physically beside him every night, but your soul left the room years ago. And you believe this is justified because he does not speak to you the way you need. You believe you are the victim. But I can see your soul, and I can see his, and what I see is this: you are both victims, and you are both guilty. The chain between you, the holy bond of your marriage, is wrapped so tightly around both of your throats that neither of you can breathe." Filomena began to weep. Not quietly. She wept with the deep convulsive sobs of someone who has been holding back a flood for years and has finally broken. Because Padre Pio had named it. He had named the exact thing she had been doing, the thing she had never confessed, the thing she had never even identified as a sin, the deliberate, calculated withdrawal of emotional presence as a punishment for her husband's inability to meet her needs. She had called it patience. She had called it long-suffering. She had called it acceptance, but Padre Pio called it what it was: a weapon. A slow, invisible weapon that was destroying not only Roberto's soul, but her own. Now I need to pause and tell you what happened when Roberto entered the confessional, because what Padre Pio said to him reveals the other half of this spiritual equation, and it is equally devastating. Roberto knelt down and delivered his confession with the economy of words that defined his entire life. He spoke for less than 2 minutes. He confessed anger at a fellow fisherman. He confessed missing a holy day of obligation. He confessed a moment of envy toward a neighbor who had bought a new boat. Padre Pio listened, and when Roberto was done, the old friar leaned closer to the screen and said, "You have told me about your boat and your neighbor and your missed mass. Now tell me about your wife." Roberto was confused. What about his wife? He had not sinned against his wife. He was faithful. He provided for her. He had never struck her. Padre Pio said, "My son, I can see the bond between you and Filomena. It was placed there by God on the day of your wedding. It is meant to be a river of grace flowing between two souls. But what I see is not a river. What I see is a dry canal, stone walls with no water. And do you know why the water has stopped flowing? Because you have dammed it. Not with cruelty, not with violence, with silence. With the silence that says, 'I am here, but I refuse to give you the one thing your soul is starving for.' A word of love, a word of recognition, a word that says, 'I see you, Filomena, I see your suffering, I see your loneliness, and I am sorry that my silence has caused it.'" Roberto's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the kneeler. He was a man who had spent his entire life controlling his emotions, channeling them into physical labor, into the rhythm of the nets and the tides. And now a friar behind a wooden screen was asking him to feel something he had spent 50 years building walls against. He said, "Father, I am not a man of words. I never have been." And Padre Pio's response was something that I believe every husband in the world needs to hear. He said, "Neither was the Lord on the cross. He hung there for 3 hours and spoke only 7 times, 7 short sentences. But those 7 sentences redeemed the world. You do not need to be a man of many words, Roberto. You need to be a man of 7 words. 7 words, spoken to your wife one time from the depths of your soul. 'I love you and I am sorry.' 7 words. The same number Padre Pio had given to Lucia Ferraro in another confession, for another sin, with the same devastating simplicity. I love you, and I am sorry. But what Padre Pio revealed next is the part that makes this story about so much more than one couple from Manfredonia, because he explained to Roberto the spiritual mechanism by which the hidden sin of conjugal silence operates, and his explanation reveals why this sin is so uniquely destructive. Padre Pio told Roberto that when God created the sacrament of marriage, he designed it as what the friar called un circuito di grazia, a circuit of grace. Like an electrical circuit, he said, grace is meant to flow continuously between husband and wife. The husband's love feeds the wife's soul. The wife's love feeds the husband's soul. The flow is meant to be perpetual, self-sustaining, growing stronger with each cycle. And when the circuit is functioning properly, both souls grow toward God together, not in parallel, but intertwined, like two vines climbing the same wall. But when one spouse withdraws, when one spouse closes the circuit, the grace stops flowing in both directions, not just in one, both, because the circuit is one loop. If you break it at any point, the entire current dies. This, Padre Pio said, is the hidden connection that most married couples never understand. Roberto believed his silence affected only himself. Filomena believed her withdrawal affected only herself. But through the sacramental bond, Roberto's silence was starving Filomena's soul of grace, and Filomena's withdrawal was starving Roberto's soul of grace. They were destroying each other simultaneously, each believing they were only protecting themselves. Padre Pio went further. He told Roberto that this broken circuit had specific, measurable spiritual consequences that he could see with his spiritual vision. He described 4 stages of deterioration that occur when the marital circuit of grace is broken. The first stage he called il raffreddamento, the cooling. This happens in the first year of silence. The souls of both spouses begin to lose spiritual warmth. Prayer becomes difficult. Mass feels empty. The sense of God's presence, which should be strengthened by a healthy marriage, begins to fade. Both spouses feel it, but neither connects it to the marital silence. They blame themselves, or they blame God, or they blame the busyness of life. They do not realize that the primary channel through which God sends grace into a married person's life, the channel of the sacramental bond, has been shut down. The second stage he called la separazione interiore, the interior separation. This happens between 1 and 3 years into the broken circuit. The souls begin to drift apart in the spiritual realm, even as the bodies remain in the same home. Padre Pio said he could see this as a visible gap between the two souls, a dark space that grew wider with each passing month. In this stage, the spouses begin to develop separate spiritual lives. One prays in the morning, the other at night. One finds comfort in devotion, the other in activity. The unity that God intended, the two becoming one flesh, one soul partnership, begins to fracture into 2 isolated individuals sharing a house. The third stage he called l'indurimento, the hardening. This happens between 3 and 7 years. The walls that each spouse has built around their pain begin to calcify. What was once a temporary defense becomes a permanent structure. The husband says, "This is just who I am." The wife says, "I have accepted that he will never change." And Padre Pio said that at this stage, the sacramental bond itself begins to change character. Instead of carrying grace, it begins to carry resentment. Instead of feeding both souls, it starves both souls. The chain that was meant to draw them to heaven begins to drag them both downward. Not toward hell necessarily, but toward a spiritual twilight. A gray existence where neither soul grows, where neither soul hears God clearly, where both souls exist in a kind of spiritual limbo while still alive. The fourth stage, which Padre Pio said Roberto and Filomena had reached, he called la morte paralela, the parallel death. 2 souls dying side by side, 2 candles flickering out in the same sealed room. At this stage, the couple functions perfectly in the world. They pay their bills, they raise their children, they attend Mass, they fulfill every external obligation. But their souls are in a state of spiritual suspended animation, neither growing, neither declining visibly, simply frozen. And this, Padre Pio said, was the most dangerous state of all, because it feels like stability, it feels like peace, but it is not peace. It is the absence of life masquerading as peace. And this is where Padre Pio said something that I carry with me every single day of my life. He said, "The demon does not need to tempt married couples into adultery or violence. That is crude work. The demon's masterpiece is silence. He whispers to the husband, 'You do not need to speak. Your work is enough.' He whispers to the wife, 'You have every right to withdraw. He does not deserve your warmth.' And with those two whispers, both souls begin to die, slowly, imperceptibly, like two candles in a sealed room, consuming the same oxygen. They flicker and fade and eventually go dark, and neither one knows why, because neither one can see that the air they both need has been used up by their own silence. Two candles in a sealed room. That image has stayed with me for years, because it describes exactly what David and I experienced during those 2 years of cold distance. We were both flickering, we were both fading, and we were both convinced it was the other person's fault. I thought David's rejection of the faith was killing my spirit. David thought my rigid piety was killing his freedom. And we were both right, and we were both wrong. Because what was really happening was exactly what Padre Pio described. The circuit of grace had been broken, and both of our souls were suffocating in the sealed room of our own silence. Now let me tell you what Padre Pio prescribed for Roberto and Filomena, because this is the practical heart of the teaching, and it is so simple that most people dismiss it immediately, which is exactly what makes it so powerful. Padre Pio gave Roberto and Filomena the same instruction, independently, without telling either one what he had said to the other. He told Roberto, "Every night, before you go to sleep, take your wife's hand. You do not need to say anything else. Just take her hand and hold it for the time it takes to pray one Our Father silently. That is all. One Our Father, 30 seconds. But in those 30 seconds, you are reopening the circuit. You are telling her soul, through the bond that God created, I am still here. I have not left. The river is not dry." He told Filomena, "Every morning, before anyone else wakes, go to the place where Roberto keeps his fishing boots by the door, kneel beside them, and pray one Hail Mary for his soul, not for his behavior, not for him to change, not for him to become the husband you wish he were, for his soul. Because when you pray for his soul, the grace flows through the bond directly into him, and he will feel it, even if he cannot name what he is feeling. He will feel something warm where there was something cold. He will feel something opening where there was something closed." And then Padre Pio told each of them separately the same final instruction. On Sunday, after Mass, walk home together. And on that walk, tell each other one thing. Just one thing, not a complaint, not a request, not a criticism. One thing you are grateful for about the other person. One thing, and let that one thing be the seed that breaks through the stone. Roberto and Filomena left San Giovanni Rotondo that day without knowing what Padre Pio had said to the other. They rode the bus home in their customary silence. But that night, something happened. Roberto reached for Filomena's hand in the dark. He said nothing. He simply reached across the cold space between them in the bed and took her hand, and he held it. Filomena later told her cousin Angela that when Roberto's hand touched hers, she felt something she could only describe as a current. Not a physical sensation exactly, but something deeper. Something in her chest that had been frozen for years suddenly cracked, like ice breaking on a lake in spring. She did not know that Padre Pio had told him to do this. She simply felt the touch, and something inside her that had been dead came back to life. The next morning, before dawn, Filomena crept to the front door where Roberto's fishing boots stood in their usual place, caked with salt and worn from years of use. She knelt beside them on the cold tile floor and prayed one Hail Mary. Not for Roberto to change, not for Roberto to speak more or feel more or be the husband she had imagined when she was 20. For his soul. For the man kneeling in those boots on a rocking boat in the Adriatic, pulling nets in the cold darkness, providing for her and their children with the only language he knew. Roberto came downstairs that morning and found Filomena in the kitchen making coffee. He looked at her, and for the first time in years, he said something that was not about the weather or the children or the household. He said, "The coffee smells good today." It was not, "I love you." It was not a sonnet or a declaration. It was 4 words about coffee. But Filomena heard what was behind those words. She heard the effort. She heard the crack in the wall. She heard a man who had been silent for 15 years trying, in the only way he knew how, to reopen the circuit. She said, "I'm glad you like it." 6 words. But in those 6 words, the current began to flow again. Over the following weeks and months, Roberto and Filomena followed Padre Pio's prescriptions faithfully. The nightly hand-holding became a ritual. The morning prayer beside the boots became Filomena's most sacred practice. The Sunday walk home from Mass became the time when, slowly, haltingly, awkwardly, they began to tell each other things they had never said. Roberto told Filomena that he loved the way she sang when she thought no one was listening. Filomena told Roberto that she admired his hands, the way they could mend anything, fix anything, hold anything steady in a storm. Roberto told Filomena that he had been afraid for years that she had stopped loving him, and that the fear had made him retreat further into silence. Filomena told Roberto that she had mistaken his silence for indifference, and that the mistake had nearly killed her. And Padre Pio, according to the Capuchin records, received a letter from Filomena 6 months later. In it she wrote, "Father, the river is flowing again. I can feel it. Not every day is easy. Not every silence is gone. But the chain is no longer around our throats. It is around our hearts, where it belongs. Now I have told you something that I believe is one of the most important spiritual teachings for married couples in the entire body of Padre Pio's wisdom. The hidden sin of conjugal silence, the broken circuit of grace, the way the sacramental bond transmits not only love but also pain, and the devastatingly simple cure that Padre Pio prescribed. If this teaching has touched your heart, if you recognize your own marriage in any part of Roberto and Filomena's story, I want to ask you to consider supporting this mission through the Super Thanks button below. These testimonies from the Capuchin archives are not easy to find, translate, or present in a way that reaches English-speaking Catholic families around the world. Your Super Thanks is not just a donation. It is you saying, "This truth saved my marriage, and it needs to save others." Padre Pio promised that those who spread the truth of God would receive special protection, become a guardian of these revelations. Help us bring them to every Catholic couple who is sitting in silence tonight, not knowing that their souls are slowly dying together. But I cannot end this story without giving you the full picture, because what happened to Roberto and Filomena over the years that followed is evidence that Padre Pio's prescription was not a temporary fix. It was a permanent transformation. I want to share one more thing from my own experience here, because this next part of the story is where I see God's fingerprint most clearly. When David and I were going through our 2 years of silence, there was a moment that I now recognize as the turning point. It was not a dramatic confrontation. It was not a tearful reconciliation. It was a Tuesday evening and I was washing dishes, and David walked into the kitchen and said, "That sermon on Sunday was actually quite good, wasn't it?" He had not spoken about faith in over a year. He had mocked my church-going for months. And here he was, in the kitchen, offering me 5 words about a sermon. I almost missed it. I almost said something sarcastic, but something, I believe it was the Holy Spirit, stopped my tongue and let me simply say, yes, it really was. That was our fishing boots moment. That was our coffee moment. That was the crack in the wall through which the circuit began to flow again. And everything that followed, David's gradual return to the faith, our reconciliation, the restoration of our family, it all traces back to that one tiny moment in the kitchen. God does not need grand gestures. He needs one open door. Roberto never became a man of many words. That was not the cure Padre Pio prescribed, because that was not the disease. The disease was not Roberto's personality. The disease was the broken circuit. And the circuit can flow through a touch as easily as through a speech. Roberto learned to speak through his hands, the nightly hand-holding. A touch on Filomena's shoulder as he passed through the kitchen. A hand placed on her back during Mass. These were his words. And Filomena learned to hear them. Filomena never stopped wanting deeper conversation. That desire was part of who God made her to be. But she stopped punishing Roberto for not providing it. She found her conversations in her prayer group, in her friendships, in her letters to her sister in Bari, and she channeled her deepest words not at Roberto but at God in prayer, knowing that through the sacramental bond, the grace of those prayers would flow directly to her husband's soul. Their daughter, Teresa, testified many years later that the change in her parents was like watching the seasons change, gradual, almost imperceptible day by day, but undeniable over time. She said, "My parents went from existing in the same house to living in the same heart, and it started with my father holding my mother's hand in the dark." Roberto died in 1981 at the age of 72 of a heart attack on his fishing boat. He died doing what he had done his entire life, working for his family in the Adriatic. Filomena was at home when the news arrived. According to Teresa, her mother sank to her knees beside Roberto's fishing boots, which still stood by the front door, and prayed one final Hail Mary, not in grief, in gratitude, because those boots represented 28 years of a circuit that never broke again after that night in February when a fisherman reached across the darkness and took his wife's hand. This is what Padre Pio saw. This is what he understood about marriage that most couples never learn. The bond is real, the chain is real, and it carries everything, love and pain, grace and sin, speech and silence in both directions, simultaneously, for as long as you both shall live. And so I want to ask you now, directly, to make a commitment, not to me, not to this channel, to yourself and to the person you married. Tonight, wherever you are, whatever state your marriage is in, whether you have been silent for days or weeks or years, do what Roberto did. Reach across the darkness, take their hand. You do not need to speak, you do not need to explain. Just hold their hand for the time it takes to pray one Our Father silently, 30 seconds, that is all. And tomorrow morning, before anyone else wakes, find something that belongs to your spouse, their shoes, their coat, their coffee mug. Kneel beside it and pray one Hail Mary for their soul, not for their behavior, for their soul. And on Sunday after Mass, tell them one thing you are grateful for about them, not what you wish they would change, what you are grateful for right now, as they are, flawed and imperfect and struggling, just like you. Commit to these 3 things, not forever, for 1 week, 7 days, and see what happens to the air in that sealed room. See if the candles start to flicker back to life. I made this commitment with David 20 years ago after I heard this teaching for the first time. And I can tell you, from the deepest well of my experience, that the circuit came back to life. It was not immediate, it was not dramatic, it was gradual, like the seasons changing, but it was real, And our marriage today at 62 and 64 is more alive, more grace-filled, more deeply connected than it was at 25. Not because we became different people, because we reopened the circuit, because we stopped suffocating each other with silence and started breathing together again. Padre Pio said, "The rosary is the weapon." But I would add, from what he taught Roberto and Filomena, that love spoken aloud, even in just 7 words, even in just a touch, is the weapon against the silence that kills marriages. The demon's masterpiece is silence. Your weapon against it is 1 word, 1 touch, 1 prayer beside a pair of worn-out boots. If this story touched you today, I want to hear about it. Are you living in the kind of silence that Roberto and Filomena lived in? Have you felt the circuit of grace go dead in your marriage? Or have you experienced the moment when it came back to life? Type circuit in the comments if you are ready to recommit to the flow of grace in your marriage. And share this video with your spouse. Watch it together. Let it be the beginning of a conversation that has been waiting years to happen. Because Padre Pio's message was not meant for one couple in Manfredonia, it was meant for every husband and wife who are sitting in silence tonight, 2 candles in a sealed room, slowly flickering out. There is still air, there is still light, but you must open the door, and you must open it now.